provocative, and digs deep into the issues. It's KFM's Hot Seat. The hottest debate on all relevant topics, live on KFM's Hot Seat tonight. KFM's Hot Seat. Every weekday, 7 to 8 p.m. KFM's Hot Seat. Only on 933 KFM.
Good evening and welcome to this edition of the Hot Seat this Friday, the 23rd of April 2020, and with me in the studio is a panel of the most experienced journalists and pundits to discuss the major events of the week. Clockwise, I have Dismas Nkunda from civil society. I have Obed Katurebe. He is from the Government Media Center. Both of them, by the way, I must mention, are Banyarwanda. Of course, right across me, I have from the Kingdom of Toro, our MP for Russia. We don't recognize the one who was elected. Charles Mwangusha, a historical on this show. He used to be hosting this show. Next to him is Raymond Mujuni. He recently asked the most difficult question, and I pity the girl for answering yes. I don't know what she doesn't know what she has gotten herself into. But Raymond Mujuni is from the Nation Media Group, and of course I have Nkunda, one of the leading consultants minting money, and is my grandson from
Teso.
From Teso. First of all, Engaraki Nai. Apupi Engwetenge.
The only words Andrew knows in Teso are I am hungry, please help me.
And of course, from the Democratic Republic of Congo is my own grandson Emmanuel Tabaru. First of all, I have 3 Batoro, 2 Banyarwanda, and 1 Muteso. All of them are cattle keepers. All of them are cattle keepers. I think this is a pastoral show. Okay, gentlemen, our fellow pastoralists in Chad, I do not know whether you know that we have pastoralists in Chad. The president Idris Deby was apparently, I don't know what the truth is, but killed in combat. I don't know whether by a drone, a bullet, or whatever. Then his son has taken over, yet it was supposed to be the vice president. I want to begin with you. Does it give us an idea of what is going to happen in Uganda? Because the son was the army commander.
I don't know actually. That's a good question. I don't know which part. The shooting, the succession plan.
Whatever it is, a succession is the most important.
No, actually, there's funny social media. Social media. Someone was writing and saying, I don't know why God missed the direct. He was supposed to be in Uganda, but simply because Ugandans are using VPN, the location of exactly where it was supposed to be. Yes. So
actually, so many presidents have died recently. Yeah.
No, actually, yeah. So I think that I've seen pictures. Of course, this world of social media you can't understand. I've seen pictures in which actually the body of Idris Deby was shot in the back. I don't know how they shoot a person in the back if the person is in flight in a combat, because they say he was
maybe he was retreating from the front line,
unless he was running away from the
yes. I'm much more interested in the succession, because the constitutional process has not been followed, because he was, I think, killed on Saturday. They announced his death on Monday after they had sat internally and changed things and put there his son, who was already in the army. And I don't know, Charles Mwangusha, whether it has any implications also on Uganda. Is it possible, for example, if President Museveni, we woke up one morning, God forbid, and is not there, whether we would have a succession like the one they have had? So the commander of the SFC, General Muhoozi Kainerugaba, takes over.
Well, I think you can't compare Chad with Uganda. We don't have an active war going on. So there is no chance the president would be caught on the front line. If
he would go there.
Or if you would actually deploy, he would go on the front line.
He always goes on the front line.
We know which front line.
Yes.
That's
for the cameras.
Ambushed by Kon in Teso.
Well, we can discuss that another time. But the thing is, President Deby had just won an election. They had just declared that he was in the lead, in a comfortable lead to win that election. So he'd have been going for his 7th term? Sixth term. Then the son, Kaka, which is interesting because Kaka means grandmother, and like it means in most of our local dialects here, is announced to take over in an interim period for 18 months to prepare elections. The idea would have been, he didn't have a running mate, but he had a team that delivered that election. Wasn't there somebody who was running with the party who would come from the party and take over? Isn't it the
before he's
president?
sworn in, there is an incumbent vice president. Maybe there
Yeah,
is.
there is an incumbent vice president. I don't know the Chadian constitution. I haven't read it, but there is a vice president
Then
who
the
should be
second
the
in
next
line of
person.
succession is the Speaker of Parliament.
Speaker of Parliament,
I think the third is the Chief Justice.
which
That's
is
how
like the
it's written.
Ugandan constitution. The thing is, these things happen like this. If you reflect back 2000, DR Congo, Joseph Kabila is assassinated.
No, Desiree.
Desiree Kabila, yes, is assassinated, and Joseph is fished from some remote part of the Congo and handed the reins of power.
Yes, but
So-
I want to come to Obed. Obed, isn't that the better way in societies that where the states and nations have not yet consolidated, where the traditional attitudes of people are monarchical, when a head of state dies, isn't it natural, and he has a son who is effective in the army, you allow succession of that way because that's the only smooth way to ensure that the climate
No,
is stable.
I don't think I agree with you on that one because there's already even war between the siblings. I think there is some other older son who feels it should have been him, and he's a colonel. I think even.
But the brother is a general.
Even then, but we can see they're not agreeing, and there were even some shootout, and they had.
The problem is that they're born of different mothers. So,
Okay. But even then, if the constitution says there's a vice president to take over, or if not, then the speaker, it should be like that. But these are typical West African behavior of these other
Chad is Central Africa.
Chad is Central Africa.
Francophone, maybe typical Francophone
typical
behavior.
Francophone countries, Chad, Niger, and whatever. They have small populations. I was reading, is it 5 million or 4? Quite small. You probably can do anything, but it can't, I would rule out such things happen in Uganda. I think Ugandans would go by the constitution.
What do you think, Ejakite?
I think that what's happening in Chad is less a statement about Chad as Chad, the way that Ndogo Obed puts it, but a statement really about the 3 steps forward, 2 steps back progress of Africa, or many parts of Africa. Because if you go with the conspiracy theory that it's possible this guy was actually taken out as
By
an
his own
act of,
people.
by his own people, which seems to be the more plausible option. It's really a testament of the fact that you still have violent changes of government, not a thing of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, but something still happening in the 21st century. If you look at what happened in North Africa with the Arab Spring, if you look at what's been happening in Sudan, Omar Bashir thrown out, you have Salva Kiir and Riek Machar trying a violent overthrow of government. I mean, Riek Machar trying to remove the government using the force of arms. I know that the people, for example, outside Rwanda, who've also been trying the option of using a violent overthrow, and there are many people in this country who would be happy to take Museveni out militarily, but they just don't have the capacity because the guy's proven a tough nut. Yeah, so I think that it's really a statement of just how difficult consolidating democracy is, but also the fragility of our states. There are not many states where you have a head of state going out of action and you have a smooth transition of power, as you saw in Tanzania and a few other parts of Africa.
But we're clearly seeing it in
It's a
Chad in
smooth
this
transition.
sense.
Yeah,
They
this
have a
typical
smooth transition
that's
of power.
contested.
Who is contesting it?
No, there's no,
I think the what is happening in Chad, like Obed was saying, is something we've seen in Francophone Africa, most of these countries, where French interests are important. Democracy is secondary. The most important thing is security and stability. You saw that in Togo with Faure Eyadema, who was replaced by the son Eyadema. You saw it with
Nassingbe Eyadema was
Nassingbe
replaced by Faure
Eyadema.
Omar
You saw
Bongo replaced
Omar
by
Bongo
Ali Bongo.
by Ali Bongo, and both ceremonies were attended by French presidents. And we're seeing it in
Obiang Nguema will be replaced by Nguema.
But Obiang Nguema, the uncle, he killed the uncle to come to power.
Yes, no,
Obiang
this
was
one will
not the
be
son of
replaced.
Matthias.
Yes.
Matthias Nguema was the president. He was the uncle of Obiang.
Yes.
Obiang was head of
I'm
security.
saying Obiang will be replaced by his son.
But
Yeah, because his son is the
Preble
minister of
Theodorine.
defense and vice president.
He's vice president, yeah.
and now you
Minister of
see
defense, don't forget that.
you saw it in Chad with the visit of President Macron today to attend the state funeral. I wouldn't pass off Chad as one of the failed states. It's actually quite strong militarily, could even be stronger than most of the armies in Eastern Africa. I think it's the only army since the 80s that has been able.
Small information. When they attempted to fight the UPDF, just a single assault, we killed 5,000 of them on River Congo, and they retreated. They didn't even stay in Congo
but
for
also,
even a
but
week.
also Congo and Rwanda were routed by Uganda and Rwanda were routed by the Zimbabweans, and so these victories sometimes don't
Uganda
mean
never
much.
fought the Zimbabweans. We never faced the Zimbabweans. No.
So who did we face?
The Giants.
Who's air? Their air power.
Angolans, I think.
The Angolans, yes.
No, we had Angolans in the DR
In the
Congo.
DRC,
That's
but
in the early 2000s.
but
They fought the Rwandese.
But the
Ugandans.
Chadians fought and pushed back Gaddafi's forces in the 80s. Even currently,
But that was
I think outside.
Hissène Habré.
Mm.
There was a president of Chad called Gukun who was allied to Gaddafi.
Mm.
So when he was overthrown,
Gaddafi intervened.
by Hissène Habré, Gaddafi refused to recognize Hissène Habré. In fact, at the OU conference of 1982, Gaddafi invited Gukun who had been overthrown and gave him the seat. The other African presidents, when they came, they found an overthrown president there. They said, no, you must sit the Chadian delegation led by Hissène Habré. Hissène Habré was later removed in 89 by Idriss Déby.
But to talk about the Chadian presence and why it's important. So outside of I think possibly Uganda and Rwanda, I think Chad has its military in most countries. They've sent their militaries to Niger, to Mali, to Nigeria, which is a much bigger country, much bigger economy, and they've been a bulwark against radical Islam in not just Central Africa but also West Africa. So there was a significant ally. There was significant. Well, I'm sure there are many other African countries that could provide cheap labor, but they were not considered to be part of the G5. But
Burundi deployed in Somalia.
He was a key ally for the French and the US, and that had a significant say in who replaced him. So I don't see chaos. I think it's a very much orderly transition, in the sense that we saw the transition in Tanzania, only that this time it's within the family because of those interests I was talking about.
I want to hear the perspective of
coup d'etat can't be
what do
you also make on the transition?
They've crossed the borders, they crossed the airport.
No, they reopened the borders, they reopened everything, they even removed the curfew that had been imposed.
It's never a good thing normally when militaries take over what should have been a transition that is constitutionally lined out. But in countries where you don't have histories of respect of constitutions, you should expect that. And I think that actively at war, rebels had threatened to overtake the capital city, even with the former president. And they are likely to do it again.
But that's the first time. There is a time they attacked rebels came to N'Djamena, the capital of Chad, attacked the presidential palace, and the battle was fought at the presidential palace. Yeah. I've never understood the way the system is organized. How do rebels move all the way from some...
It's possible.
It's possible. It's a desert.
Very
they
possible.
just drive.
Which defeats the argument by Kwezi that it's a strong army. You can't have a
But
strong army.
also the question is,
losing
do you
a
have
commander-in-chief.
defenses? How do rebels come up to the presidential
You
palace?
see, if you're dealing with a very small population, you're dealing with a desert country, movement is easier for those people. They understand it. So you can't afford to deploy. You can't afford, like President Museveni, to deploy a whole brigade. You don't have that number. Those numbers.
Yes. It also means the enemies don't have the number. Anyway, we have to take a break and we'll be right back. Welcome back to this edition of the Hot Seat, featuring the panel of the most experienced journalists to discuss the major events of the week. Our second issue of discussion, we cannot continue with Chad because we have an issue. I want to begin with you, Dismas. Look, the American government has imposed travel restrictions on officials of government of Uganda. It's the US policy. They do not reveal which person is on the list, but you will go to the embassy, apply for a visa, and you will say you have been declined. We don't know who it is. What do you make of it?
Well,
Uganda
it's
a
an
big
indictment.
ally of the US, and this is a unprecedented.
You can be an ally of the US, but as long as you are doing things which are against the values of what the United States thinks, issues like issues to do with the democratic the harassment that is exacted on individuals who are taking part in an electoral process. Those are the things that those are the things that they have as determinants of who is supposed to be their friend or not.
But how come Saudi Arabia is doing all those things?
You should have put a caveat when you do that.
No, why two wrongs don't make one one.
No, you are saying that if you violate American values, I'm saying if you do it,
Are we
there are
talking
many
about,
countries that
let's
do
have
it.
a discussion about Saudi Arabia, but today are we speaking about Uganda?
Your government seems to be under siege.
No, it's not under siege.
Are you on the list?
By the way, I should warn you
I mean,
that when they impose those travel restrictions, it's just a signal that we disapprove. The next step is to impose sanctions. I can tell you, if Uganda doesn't do something in the next so many months, you're moving to sanctions. And let me warn you another thing. When those guys impose sanctions, the Americans, trust that the Europeans will follow. The EU will immediately follow. The Europeans are European countries are client states of the United States. So if the United States imposes sanctions on Uganda, you trust the EU and all EU countries.
so, Andrew, I want to ask you, so they impose sanctions on the whole, literally. Uganda, they have individuals who they have put on such a no sanction visa denials. So is Tanzania, so is Kenya, so is Rwanda, so is South Sudan. So you want to suggest that next step would be sanctioning the whole of South Africa,
which I think it is how you handle it.
Which I think
because if it is not the restrictions, when they put those restrictions, it is a signal. Many countries, when this happens, may be through diplomatic work, through lobbying. You know, the American government is always available for hire. You can hire lobbyists in Washington, D.C., pay them very well. They will go and talk to senators. They will go and talk to the State Department. They can ease those things. You have to do something, both internally and internationally, to ensure that that signal does not slide toward the sanctions and sanctions to slide.
No, Andrew, I don't think it's so much a thing. I can talk on record. I think most European countries are not, if not all of them, are not with them on this one. You remember, shortly after elections, the noise about EU ceased. It's Americans that kept on with it and they're issuing these endless statements. In my view, it's typical henpeking behavior of American government. Like I said, it's not only in Uganda, it's in all third world countries. The other day, you saw how they were trying to put their behavior on Russia, but Putin just put his foot on the ground, and I think they put them. Before I conclude, literally I don't think beyond this, the government of Uganda is not ending any bilateral relationship with America, like the statement was saying.
Does it have capacity?
No. You can.
Guys,
North Korea chose.
You know we have very little time. I want to come to
North Korea chose to.
Charles.
You know, I'm enjoying the way.
What did you read out of it? Because I think that really, Obed, if government of Uganda thinks like you are burying your head in the sand.
No, I actually wanted to add. I think I like the way Uganda government officials have been responding to these sanctions. You know, they make Uganda feel like it's such a huge, powerful country that America needs at whatever cost. But like you said, the concern is, where does this lead? And you'll not see the impact of this visa denial, the statement, until somebody walks into an embassy, especially United Kingdom, Germany, France, the countries we'll have to go to. And then they tell you we can't give you a visa, and you're a senior government official. And you get stuck.
And they stamp.
But where did you get the idea that because when America...
No, what I'm saying...
Then the whole of Europe follow.
Traditionally...
I can trust you can take my word, Obed, to the bank, that if Americans impose sanctions on Uganda, the European countries will follow suit. It will be a signal.
Yes, and then the other thing Obed talked about, what is happening, for example, in Tanzania, is going to shift that position. So it depends on how you respond to them.
Yes.
Kenyans negotiate with the Americans all the time.
Yes.
And they engage at a very high level and so intensely. And you'll not hear Kenyans throwing back words like we've been doing in Uganda. I mean, there's a bit of arrogance in the responses from government officials here towards those sanctions instead of explaining.
Let me come to Evan. From my knowledge, talking to people in the Western world, is that there have been, if you have followed, there was a lot of brutality during this election. There have been these abductions after the election. There were restrictions imposed on Bobby Wine. Normally, these actions in and of themselves don't become a problem. It is how you handle the conversation around those actions. From my own view, Uganda government has surrendered that space of that conversation to the opposition, so that if you go on Ugandan social media and the mainstream media in Uganda, actually about 90 to 95% of the conversation is dominated by enemies of Uganda. And that is where the problem also begins, that we don't hear the government side on trying to sanitize its own actions. And therefore, actions are worsened by the fact that there is no follow-up attempt to influence the conversation, to increase your share of voice on what is happening and giving a justification.
I agree. And of course, part of the problem is that you have a foreign affairs minister who has his own challenges in that same space where he's supposed to be doing lobbying. and that quite complicates things. But I think unlike Obed and his boss, Afono Pondo, whom I listened to on NBS yesterday, President Museveni knows where power lies. And I think he's smart at strategy. He wouldn't speak the way Obed is speaking. Once in a while he wants to sound tough, but behind the scenes he's deploying his lobbyists to put in a word and things like that. So I think that he takes his things more seriously than his spokespersons do. And he knows that the stakes are high, especially because two things are happening. You have the emergence of Joe Biden and that Democratic Party infrastructure. And Biden keeps saying America's place and role in the world must be reclaimed. So there's a public relations aspect on the part of the Americans to this. We have to show that
that's very important.
America is up there. We're the prefix of democracy, even when we have our own challenges and things like that.
In fact, the only way America can cover its internal democratic deficits is by trying to promote the idea of freedom and democracy abroad.
In fact, even Biden, even Saudi Arabia that you're talking about, Biden has been making quite harsher comments about them, at least compared to Trump. So I think the mood in Washington and New York is America must reclaim its place in the world. And of course, for them to achieve that, they need fertile ground. The fertile ground in the case of Uganda is that you have a highly polarized nation where the president doesn't enjoy as much popularity as enjoyed in 1986, 96. And therefore, you have, I'm aware, especially within the opposition groups in this country, and Ugandans in the diaspora, there's a lot of lobbying by Ugandans and people that are interested in whatever commercial and political interests have in this country. They're happening for example, economic sanctions, which I think is a silly thing, because the worst thing you can wish for a country, no matter the disagreements you have, are economic sanctions.
Okay, but I want to come to Raymond before you come to whatever. You, Raymond, what do you think is going to be the consequence of this beginning of travel restrictions on Uganda? It's the first time America is imposing travel restrictions on Ugandan officials. Because Uganda has been an ally of the US on practically all the data work. Is an ally of the US for all the data work.
The crisis of sanctions is that rather than influence democratic behavior, they actually influence anti-democratic behavior, all through the study of international diplomacy, which means that Uganda is going to seek allies that would replace the place that the United States of America would be playing in the politics of the country.
China and Russia.
But yes, but also I think that we should be aware of the kind of sanctions we're talking about. There are travel restrictions. A group of Ugandan journalists and together with some American journalists have applied to make sure that the State Department explains the names on the list and the rationale behind that decision making. I think that decision will be considered by next week, so it should be able to know which people are on the travel restrictions list. But those travel restrictions,
they don't announce the people. So what happens is I think that the way this restriction works is to try to influence the behavior of public officials. They don't announce. It is when you go there that they say, we will not give you a visa. So you know it as an individual. So that if you're another person, and you're asked to go onto the streets and do dirty things, you're heading police, you behave yourself. Because if they put the list out there, then the culprits will know I no longer have a future, then I can act as I wish. By keeping it secret, they keep people on their tenterhooks to
but like I said,
influence their behavior.
There's a public access to information request which has been filed by Ugandan journalists in conjunction with American journalists to make what should be public information public. But like I said, again, the crisis of all through international diplomacy is that sanctions do not influence the democratic behavior. And as a matter of foreign policy, many countries are moving far away from them and moving towards engaging governments. What will it mean, however, for our government here? I see that many public officials, including those that I speak to, asking, does this mean we are going to be in the same space that Kale Kaihura plays in? It's already having the net effect of shocking the local public officials.
We are running almost out of time.
I didn't think I would agree with Raymond. It's been a while, but yes, I agree with him, and I mentioned it to an embassy official during a conversation sometime, that these sanctions can only encourage the hawks within the Ugandan system, and they can only alienate the moderates, because you've just come from an election, from the president's perspective or from the hawks' perspective, which was seen as an insurrection. So they defeated an insurrection, a rebellion, an uprising, and they've captured the attention of the president. However, around the presidency, you also have the moderates, the politicians within the
doves.
Yes, the politicians within the NRM who are also equally shocked by this violence, and they are looking for ways to engage with the president and tell him, look, we can do things differently. Now we've secured the next 5 years. Let's move on to the next thing. And those are the very people that are targeted with these blanket sanctions. And knowing how the Ugandan system operates, it's quite easy to say, you know what, if you kidnap someone and they turn up dead, we'll sanction the Minister of Internal Affairs, we'll sanction the IGP. In the case of Uganda, the Minister of Internal Affairs may not know. The IGP may not know. The CDF may not know. So whatever they do or not do has no bearing whatsoever on whether the abuses continue. The people who carry out the abuses don't have to hold former offices, and they don't even have to be public, that they can be sanctioned or even need to travel to the US. And the way Uganda's politics is constructed at the international level, you have the 5 permanent representatives on the Security Council. Uganda, I think, firmly has 3 members on its side. France, we've just given them a pipeline. They're not willing to undermine that significant investment by Total. We have the Chinese, who we've given the standard gauge railway, we've given them everything to do with infrastructure. And the Russians, who are on the side waiting on that uranium deal. So I don't see how this favors the Americans or their European friends. And maybe it's America's actions that are making the Europeans a bit hesitant to join them, because they can clearly see how unproductive these sanctions are.
Okay, we have to take another break and we'll be right back. We'll continue with this discussion.
But they don't.
KFM's Hot Seat.
Welcome back to this edition of the Hot Seat this evening, featuring Dismas Nkunda from Civil Society, from the Government Media Center, Obed Katurebe from Tugende, by the way, former Bureau Chief of the East African, Charles Mwangusha. We have Raymond Mujuni from the Nation Media Group, from the consulting world, the man who is making all
I'm just a humble lawyer in town.
Lawyer, consultant.
When the struggle.
Ivan Nkunda, and of course, Kwezi Tabaru from the Leo Africa Institute. Gentlemen, I want us to continue with this discussion. Somebody here said the government has hired lobbyists in Washington, D.C. to try and talk. I have always a problem of government of Uganda. Whenever it faces an international problem, the first thing is, let us go and approach Western media and Western lobbyists in order to switch talk our way. And I always tell people there is a strategic weakness there. The problem of government of Uganda is not international, it is local. The international problem, the bad international reputation is because the domestic conversations here, if you come to local debates, are toxic. So the international journalists, academics, diplomats, and other actors, and I hope somebody in the government of Uganda is listening, they pick on local conversations.
Obed is
unless you influence local conversations, all the amount of money you'll pour into the international media and international lobbyists will go down the drain. It will buy you very, very little. So the beginning point is there is a domestic problem here in Uganda, and you need to address that problem. And in addressing that problem, you also need to increase your share of voice in the domestic conversations. There are abductions taking place. Could you change the way you arrest these people you consider to be a threat? And when you are arresting them, can you be actively involved in local conversations to influence public opinion that you are doing it for the security of the country and the stability of the state? The government is absent. And it is that absence that has allowed the opposition to dominate 80, 90, in some cases 95% of all the conversations. And the international media and all other international actors, civil society, human rights organizations, diplomats, even academics are feeding on this huge volume of information that is based on domestic conversations.
Fortunately,
yes.
Or unfortunately, old man, it can only get worse and before it gets better, because the dynamics have really fundamentally shifted against General Museveni and his system's favor. you have a restless population. You have, huge unemployment, which is not really a problem of just Uganda. But people perceive government based on their lived experience. But you also have the NRM largely now becoming a transactional thing. So the president, to be able to amend the constitution, needs to spend money paying members of parliament, whatever that decision. For him to win an election, he has to procure it using violence and lots of money. He cannot convince, for example, most urban areas in this country to vote him without the use of violence and money. Even when he deploys that, it doesn't work out. As we saw in the last election, most of Buganda went red. So I think it can only get worse because he's not preparing for 2026.
Okay, since tell us how can it get better?
No,
You guys have a
it
plan
won't.
to make
It won't get worse for sure. To me, this is typical hysteria that comes with election in most of African countries. The sanctions against Tanzanian officials were a result of the election. So was Burundi. So was Kenya. So is Uganda. So. We're talking about arrests. I don't think we've had arrests in the last how many weeks. The arrests that were made towards the election time and shortly after. I think most have been even released. You saw 56 being released and looking healthy. They went back to their home. They went.
People's fingers were chopped.
No. But Ivan, you saw their pictures. Those who are dropped in Chotera.
You see,
but I'm saying, I have my space.
problem.
Hold on. And again, you're talking about the media. If you have cantankerous people like the ones we have here, who have no. The president has explained. The CDF has explained it.
I think you need to withdraw that.
Okay, I will withdraw. Okay, I will withdraw. The IGP made a elaborate explanation to that one, and I can say that in the last how many weeks things are going down.
And you see that's exactly the problem. Yes, that's exactly the problem that you're talking about. You release 54 people. It is an act of responding to the threat to the pressure that creates these sanctions. How you play that in the media, domestically, determines how people pick it. You have been at a retreat in Chankwanzi. The statements you make, how you make them, help to bridge the gap. But the problem is, Obed and company, the people speaking for government, dismiss, think there is no problem, think we are this important, and that doesn't help the narrative.
In fact, let me put
outside
this
there.
way, Charles. I saw the president speaking in Chankwanzi there. He said, you cannot be involved in PR. And he keeps saying this thing, and it's so deeply entrenched in his mind. The problem is that Obed, the issue is not the facts. The issue is the conversation.
Yes.
In fact, when I talk to Western diplomats who live in Uganda, they think that the opposition are telling 90% lies. But the lies have become truth because that's what people see. Your voice is not being heard. So when the Americans are making a decision, they're making a decision on the basis of the information that is there. There is so much fake news that actually appears in those capitals as truth. I want to come to Raymond and Mujuni there before I come to Dismas and and Kwezi. You see the point I'm making. It is not a fact of the truth. It is that one side is speaking and has actually won the hearts and minds of so many players, not just in Uganda, because in Uganda most intellectuals think the government is off the wire. And this same perception is now in the major institutions, whether they are think tanks, civil society organizations, human rights organizations, governments, diplomats, academics. That's what they believe.
But Andrew, many of the local positions that you say where government is not taking part, many of those decisions have become increasingly indefensible. The access to information of public actors in Uganda and public relations people has become also increasingly hard to get. When you talk about kidnaps, many of them are being conducted by units that are not known to the security agencies. So the police spokesperson cannot speak for them, neither can the army spokesperson speak for them. So the crisis is a governance crisis in Uganda. It's not just that there is no information to go by, but there is no way to defend information when you don't have a system within which you get access to information. In the last elections, a lot of the repression happened under the Uganda police force, and it was easily spoken to by the police spokesperson. In this election, the IGP has been actively blocking the spokespersons from owning lists of missing people that have been coming from the army. because it says if you own these lists and we find that people on these lists are dead, how do you account for them? So it's a governance crisis also. It's not just the fact of access.
That's a very important point.
No, but the other thing, Andrew, is that also the question of public relations and how there is a failure of the government to be able to deal with the kind of information.
We should
that's
actually call it
coming out.
communications rather than public
Communication.
relations, because 7 has a very bad.
It's because of the partly it's because of the change of the kind of communication that is using these days. Twitter, the kind of people who are involved in that form of communication, particularly the youth, the people who are the ones that are affiliated, the people who think very well about to. But when you get to my old friends in the communication departments of the government and speak for the government, a bit of them our age, maybe they are getting a little bit worn out, and therefore some of the things that they are saying are really things of our 1980s, but the things of 1920s.
But it's not, for me, it's the communication crisis is a consequence of a much bigger crisis, and this is where I fault the response of the international community, because it's not that the regime in Uganda all of a sudden went bad, because it had been the same regime with which Besigye had been facing for the last 20 or so years. The thing is, opposition to Museveni also shapes how Museveni reacts to that opposition.
True.
If the opposition he faces is extremist, he will not be moderate. And where government is extremist, you will not have moderate opposition. So the position of the development partners should be, do we support moderate actors within government, the doves I talked about, or the opposition, to create this middle position and make it superior? Or do we encourage the extremes on one end by supporting an opposition that has taken an extreme position, which will push government, because they see them as insurrectionists, as foreign agents, to take an even more extreme position? And I think that's the crisis that we find ourselves in, that the choice of opposition or partners that our quote-unquote foreign partners have chosen to associate with are not the moderates. And they want to associate with that kind of position and expect moderate views from government.
But let me make my pitch like this. I think that if I was government, it is my responsibility to shape my image and try to reach out to my partners. And I cannot.
It's determined by the threat you face. When America was swearing in Joe Biden and they were threatened by these white nationalists, they had to deploy the army. You thought America had forgotten about their values?
No, but I understand what you are saying. The point I'm making, first of all, I agree 100% with what you're saying. For me, the perspective is that if the government of Uganda, the international actors are influenced by particular conversations that are taking place, by particular debates. If you as a government are absent in those debates, your share of voice is so low. Let me give you an example. I've talked to Western ambassadors here, practically all of them. Many of them are the ones who tell me the opposition in Uganda tell too many lies. The problem is that when I contact my headquarters back in Europe, when we contact back the headquarters, the people there think, people think that I have been bought off by the government of Uganda, and they don't want to sell my reputation because I'm not Uganda's ambassador to my country. I'm my country's ambassador here. The perception back home by academics, by journalists, by fellow diplomats, by everybody, by think tanks, so many organizations, has been heavily influenced. Why isn't Uganda participating
in that space?
In that space also, to influence opinion. And I also tell them, before Uganda participates in that space, whether it's in London, Paris, Berlin, wherever it is, the biggest problem is here. You must be involved in domestic conversations and influencing local debate if you want to improve your image in those other countries.
In other words, Mateka Saja should increase the budget for public relations.
But I don't know whether it's a budget, by the way.
No, it's not a budget.
The first thing is that do you have, Museveni calls them cadres, let me be a religious person and say priests. Do you have a priesthood who believe in what you are doing and can be actively out there? Because most of the people who are always preaching, even by the roadside that I meet, are not paid by anybody. I know there are pastors who are making money out of churches, but many priests in this country are not making money out of preaching. So if God the Almighty has a church on every arm and leg of our existence, every day people are praying and mobilizing for Christianity, for God who is all-knowing, all-powerful, what of Yoweri Museveni, a normal human being president who says that I don't need a priesthood to spread my message? I just can't understand that.
Maybe it shows you exactly what the form of...
Yes, this is the question you're facing. Anyhow, I'll take another break. I'll be right back. Welcome back to this edition of the Hot Seat. Welcome back to this edition of the Hot Seat, featuring a part of the most experienced journalists and panelists to discuss the major events of the week. It has been hot off air and it's going to be hot on air. I have Dismas Nkunda, Obed Katurebe, Charles Mwangusha, Raymond, Mujuni, Ivan Nkunda, and Emmanuel Kwezi Tabaru. Now I want us to discuss Honorable Matia Kasaija and his budget. The budget for security has now been increased to 70 trillion. It is the largest budget. What does that tell you? And of course, Kasaija went to Ministry to Parliament and he was just out to ask to go and revise and justify why.
But is it the first time that I think it's always the thing that always the budget for
What's previously?
No, previously it was works, then second by energy, then education, then maybe security. But now security
is it for security or defense? But the thing,
but defense and security is one in the sectors.
In the sectors, but whatever it is a sign of exactly what the fears are. The fears are not about whether we have infrastructure. It's not the fears of whether we have jobs and we are creating the things for what we have as a problem of unemployment in the country, but rather the defense and knowing that how to contain any persons that would come to become an insurrection and overthrow the government.
You think, Obed, the biggest source of the increase in the security budget is because of internal threats, or we have some external threats we are afraid of?
Not in a known, but I think if you followed President Museveni's speeches, he says how he made a mistake. I think that's what was around 2000 when the donors forced him to cut budget on defense and even cut the size of the defense forces. And then when he chose to say, no, I must invest in defense, and then massive results were realized, including defeating Konye and any other threats to the country. But that said, I think I was even talking to you guys off air. I couldn't understand how this president of Chad could be killed like that. I was wondering, did this country have smart air defense to smash those rebels who are just moving on pickups all the way from Libya and were literally going half of that country, Chad? It makes sense. We have now an oil-producing country. We have other external threats. You have to have substantial investment in security if you are to guarantee any other thing we are doing as a country.
Charles Mwangusha, let me give you a number. I cannot easily because it is the 2014-2015 budget. Works and transport was 2.389 trillion. That was 15.9% of the budget. Energy and mineral development was 1.829 trillion. That was 12.2%. Education was 2 trillion, which was 13.5%. So education was actually number two. Then you had the interest payments due, which was 1 trillion 7.2. Security at that time was number 4 at 1.159. So today we are seeing for 2015-2016, that's exactly 5 years ago. Again, it was works and transport as number 1, energy and mineral development was number 2, education was number 3, interest payments was number 4, security was number 5. Now security is number 1 at 7 trillion, followed by works, which is I think 5 trillion. I mean,
yeah, because if you
if you have brought your security budget in 5 years from 1.636 trillion to 7 trillion.
Well, if you have shifted priority to infrastructure development and the results you get are that you have growing unrest, then you have to refocus. You have to refocus where you pay attention. I think the last time we moved money from other sectors to increase on the security budget was the time we were fighting to conclude the rebellion again, by Joseph Kony. Now, if you reach at a stage that you have been trying to invest in these other areas, which are supposed to be soft areas, soften the ground for you, and what you see is rising, what do you call it? Rising opposition, and opposition that is tending towards militancy, then you're going to have to reprioritize.
But I actually think that this security budget has more to do with Uganda's relations with Rwanda than
yes. And the thing is, you see, I'm not an expert on security, but if you look at the biggest cost in these security budgets, equipment, and most of it is offensive and defensive. You don't deploy it domestically. the best you can deploy domestically are buffels, and they don't cost more than $1 million a piece. But the kind of equipment that will go into tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, radar systems, planes, things that respond to external threats. So if Uganda's security budget is ballooning, it may have little to do with what is happening domestically and more to do with what is happening externally.
Ivan Okuda?
I think the rise in the security budget is more to do with securing the regime for the next 5 years. Basically,
Securing it from who?
From internal contestations and
But
contradictions.
how do you deal with internal threats?
because
You
it's,
bribe, cajole, arrest. Do you need tons of money to do
Yeah,
that?
you need all that, because you're really relying on a very thin thread of rented support.
But you'd put that
But-
money to
but-
governance
but-
to create more districts and RDCs and all
That
these
is
positions.
Kwezi. That is not them.
No, that has been done. It hasn't given results.
It doesn't give results.
That's the difference.
Because the budget for security under COVID, the many supplementary budgets for COVID was again significantly high. So it's not the first time that
Maybe it was to use COVID to create a slush fund for campaigns.
exactly. So it's security, politics, regime survival, and longevity. I think there's an interesting.
But
nexus.
now we don't have an election. Why is the budget at 7
But you have an election in 2026.
Why is
That
that now?
to start preparing.
They want within saving.
Yeah, but
They
I
look
think
to
for
be
me,
too loose to be save money.
very lastly, in a few seconds, the things that impact the ordinary man most, that would possibly endear them to the government, education, the quality of schools and things like that, health, seem to be getting less attention, and I think that is going to be even more problematic for the government, because things like job creation. Incidental, when you read the National Development Plan 1 and the National Development Plan, the most recent three. But even the budget framework paper and the political statements therein, there's commitment to improving socioeconomic livelihoods and recovery from COVID-19. I do not know how you say your budget focuses on socioeconomic recovery from, recovery from the impacts of COVID-19, and then your biggest expenditure is on security.
Okay,
The
we are running out of
astounding.
time. Raymond.
But the Rwanda thing, shouldn't forget it.
So for me, I think that the reason that we're having an increase in security budget is because the arms lobby has grown much stronger over the years, over the infrastructure lobby. And the bigger crisis that government faces now is that there is ready and easily available foreign aid towards infrastructure project than there is towards buying of equipment to engage in military warfare, for example.
But remember that even foreign aid is always part of the budget.
But also, this will be the first financial year where security will have an added number to their, so all the LDUs and enforcing of curfew is going to come back onto their budget. So
I also
they are
must
struggling.
mention that the government of Uganda has doubled the size of the army from 5 division to 10. Thank you so much, our listeners, for joining us. My panel, you have been wonderful. Good evening. We'll be right back next week with another interesting discussion. Good evening.
The hottest debate on all relevant topics, live on KFM's Hot Seat Tonight. KFM's Hot Seat covers all the relevant topics every weekday, 7 to 8 p.m.